This webinar. I'm Scott Loveridge, Director of the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. I'm your host and moderator today. We're going to be learning about 21 years of First Impressions. It's a program that has endured for quite a while within the extension system. And our resource people today are Andy Lewis from the University of Wisconsin Extension, Myra Moss from the Ohio State University Extension, and Kelly Nix from West Virginia University Extension Service. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andy. I think he's up first. It's all yours, Andy.
Well, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to talk about a program that's had some legs for many years. And when Scott first called me about this, my initial reaction is it made me feel old to think about the program going back 21 years. And it's my pleasure to have Myra and Kelly from Ohio and West Virginia with me, because it's a program that's been widely shared, and we've all benefited from that sharing with different lessons learned in our states. I wanted to give some credit to an old friend and colleague, James Schneider. He was the executive director of the Grant County Economic Development Corporation when we first developed this program. And we developed it in response to actually a poor experience we had with one of our communities that was in contention for a large employer. We felt we needed to develop a tool that would give them a better sense of how their community was perceived by outside visitors. And James has been a friend for many years, and this program has gone through a lot of revisions since that time. And again, a lot of those revisions are based on other state experiences. One of the quotes that I like very much that I think applies to the First Impressions program is the one by Mark Twain, who says, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." And I've experienced that almost on a weekly basis with communities that I work with. And much of that can be straightened out with objective, factual data. But there are also many subjective experiences in our communities that are just as important as the objective data. And First Impressions is one of those simple tools that can be used as a part of a broader economic development approach. And to be completely honest, it's almost embarrassing how simple this program is, and yet it's effective. And there's probably a lesson to be learned there. The old KISS philosophy, to keep it simple, often works well. And First Impressions, I think the way I would describe it is it provides a snapshot of our communities as visitors see us. And there are many tools in our economic development toolbox that provide objective analysis of data, but few that get at people's perceptions and attitudes. Both are important, and it's one of those early tools, I think, that can be applied, or as I'll speak in a moment, can be reapplied on a regular basis to help the community establish priorities for tourism development, retail trade development, business attraction and relocation decisions, and recruiting talent for the employers in our community. So in short, creating a good first impression can bring dollars to town, reduce costs for existing firms, and possibly even help bring in new businesses. And by participating in the program, you can help improve your community's first impression. The primary question that First Impressions addresses is this one: is what do visitors really think about our community? And I'm picking on my home community here of the city of Middleton in Wisconsin. And Middleton actually was a participant in First Impressions program. And a few years ago, we were selected by Money Magazine as the best place to live in America for small communities. So I think we're doing some things right, but we certainly learned in the program we weren't doing everything right. And the program answers this question, and it really gets at what do prospective business people, visitors, potential residents visiting our communities, what do they think? And do they always do thorough research on everything the community has to offer? One of the dangers here is after 21 years, I've got a lot of stories, and I don't want to get too sidetracked, but I was recalling the first exchange we did with Bellevue, Iowa, and the community of Bellevue got a little defensive about some of the comments we had of their school facilities, because there were a lot of temporary classrooms that were set up in trailers and some physical things that needed attention. And they asked, did we look into, their graduation rates, their placement rates, and all of that? And the fact of the matter is that that's not what this program addresses. It addresses perceptions. And more often than not, our visitors aren't taking the time to do a deep dive into the factual information about a community. Helps our communities really figure out whether we are what we say we are. So in Middleton, our theme is the good neighbor city, and I think to a large extent that's certainly true. It's certainly not uniform throughout the community, and it depends on which neighbors you're talking about. But First Impressions is a program that helps us get at what we think is true about our communities, what we may not have noticed, and an opportunity to learn from another similar community. And when we did one of our earliest evaluations in the program, that's something we certainly learned. It's the experience to learn from another community can be really powerful. You know, my wife and I serve as secret shoppers for an independent group of restaurants here in Madison. As I think about that, what we do with First Impressions is really no different than that secret shopper concept that you see applied in many communities and in many newspapers, where the newspaper reporter goes out and visits the restaurant and then reports on that experience. That's really what First Impressions is, but it's applied to communities. And when James and I were putting the program together, we believed that anyone could become a secret shopper if we provided them with a shopping list. And that's really what we did with the manual. We created a list of things in the community that impacted economic development efforts and put them into the form of a guide that could be easily used by a community and volunteers. Now, there are some different ways of doing the program, and there have been modifications in a lot of our states, and more often than not, we've got extension educators involved in the program along with a team of volunteers from the community. And I'll say that, you know, throughout my time working as a community development professional, I've really gained a healthy respect for peer learning. And I want to argue that peer learning is not inferior to the expert model, and that I believe some of the most effective learning takes place between peers. And this tool relies very much on volunteers from two similar communities, and because it's a peer learning model, I think communities tend to accept the results a whole lot easier. And I think back when we were developing this program, and I ran across a set of slides from a project that involved the previous community development educator in Grant County and the educator over in Lafayette County, and they did a project that they called participatory photography, where they each went into each other's community, in this case Lancaster and Darlington, and took pictures of all the good, the bad, and the ugly, and then reported back to the community. And what I learned from the previous educator, Dave, they basically shot the messenger. They didn't like the extension educator coming in and telling the community what was wrong with them. But to almost all of the communities that have participated in First Impressions, it's interesting to see how they accept constructive criticism from peers, and they appear to be less defensive when they get that from people that are just like them in the participating community. The model is really based on, and again, you could certainly modify this, but we've built the program around matching two similar communities. We didn't want to be comparing apples to oranges. So it's based on similar size. We want it to be convenient, so within, you know, driving distance. We want the economies to be somewhat similar. And when I say you could modify that, I mean, I've had a lot of tourism-dependent communities say, you know, if we're trying to attract people from Minneapolis and Chicago, for example, should we really be comparing ourselves to another small community? And that might be a legitimate argument for looking at a community that might be different than the other participating community. The program is conducted as a secret shopper visit, so the visitation team comes in unannounced and basically plays a role for the day, whether that might be a prospective business or somebody just driving through town or somebody visiting friends. And then they report on their experience using the checklist that I talked about, so that we make sure that they actually seen all the things in the community that we think impact that local economy. I think as I go through this list of reasons why it might make sense for a community to do an exchange, it also helps me think about why the program's been successful. It helps the communities focus priorities. I think in many cases it can build a case for project funding by addressing, you know, or identifying a key asset or a deficit within the community that needs attention. It's an opportunity to build relationships with other communities. It's a very cost-effective program. Doesn't require a lot of time. Certainly the follow-up could require time, but to do the visit is really, dedication of a day to go visit that community. It's easy to implement, and it's a good first step in a community's economic development approach. It generates excitement. It's flexible, and probably most importantly, it's fun. And I agree that Walt Disney probably had it right when he said that, when he figured out that learning could be entertaining, and who can't have fun playing a visitor for the day. Maybe another way of saying what Mark Twain said was this quote in the Dubuque Telegraph-Herald after doing our first exchange back in 1991. They said, all too often people and organizations say and may honestly believe that they want to improve, but they go about it in the wrong way. Too much self-evaluation and too little outside evaluation may mask real problems and opportunities. So it's an opportunity to get outside of that navel gazing and get an external perspective of your community. And we found over the years that in fact that is what the program does. I think a lot of communities take their assets for granted, or in many cases they don't even see them. And I like this example up in the small community of Muscadet on the Wisconsin River, which was located in Grant County and was one of the communities that I worked with. And they had a resident up there, Ellis Nelson, who ran an old gas station in town. And there were a lot of the residents that looked at that gas station as being an eyesore. But Ellis is a self-taught metal sculptor in the village of Muscadet. It's a population of about 1,400. And he exhibits his art in the lawn of that old gas station, and has turned into a real tourism attraction, and for good reason. While some residents might see it as an eyesore, you can view Ellis's and now his son, who's pretty much taken over the business. You can see his art at the Performing Arts Center in Milwaukee and the Visionary Art Museum in Baltimore, or better yet, just stop by the gas station and visit Ellis to see some of his artwork. I've honestly lost track, but we know we've had more than 150 communities use this program, some several times, and Fenimore has the record, I think. They've used the program 9 times and often go over the results as part of an annual downtown retreat. Fenimore is a population of about 2,400 in southwest Wisconsin. And as you'll hear in a minute, we've had a number of other states that have used the program, adapted the program, modified the program in many really interesting ways, and you'll be hearing a few examples of that in just a minute. I think one of the things as you think about peer learning, as you think about using volunteers, as you think about using the secret shopper concept, it's really spawned a number of revisions to the program to meet very different needs. We use this to actually evaluate county extension offices. We developed a version for county fairs. You'll be hearing about the version for Main Street. We had one for heritage tourism sites. The concepts that we apply in First Impressions really could be used in a number of different ways. And interestingly, I had an email just this morning from one of our retired district directors, Dick Pedersen, who was asking me if that concept might work for a church. And as I think about that, absolutely. So as you think about developing tools for your community, there are certainly many ways that the program could be modified to fit other needs within your community. Now, I know I've sped through a lot of slides here pretty quickly, but we've got a lot to cover, and we want to make sure we've got some time for questions. So I want to turn the program over to Kelly Nix in West Virginia. And what I'd say is we did some early evaluation in Wisconsin, but Kelly has some more.
Thank you, Andy. I just want to say, in closing your section, we really appreciate your work in developing this program. We've benefited so greatly from, continuing on, and I look forward to sharing some of the results from our impacts. And so that is my job, is to share information about program evaluation for the First Impressions program. And in a nutshell, past evaluations conducted by the University of Wisconsin and WVU revealed program participants had a high level of satisfaction with the program and its ability to affect community decisions related to things like physical appearance, infrastructure, attitudes, and learning from other communities. So that's just a couple examples of past evaluations. And what I'd like to do is spend the rest of my time talking about the long-term impact evaluation that West Virginia University has recently conducted. And before I do that, I'd like to give a little bit of background about WVU Extension Service. We adapted the program that you started, Andy, more than 10 years ago to meet the needs of West Virginia communities. And more than 60 communities have received a First Impressions program. In many cases, the First Impressions program has served as the introduction to other community development program efforts. And the purpose of our First Impression evaluation was to understand the overall effectiveness of the program, and the goal was to determine if recommendations that came from the initial First Impression program visit led to changes in community and economic development. We had 4 specific objectives, and those objectives were basically to identify whether the First Impressions program made an impact on general conditions of the community, to understand what program suggestions led to community improvements, to understand whether the First Impressions program led to other community improvements, and to identify barriers that prevented the community from implementing the suggestions. So the methodology that we used was basically the program evaluation occurred in the spring of 2012, and we used a sampling frame of 32 First Impressions communities, and these were based on sufficient duration from the initial program visit to allow impacts to occur. So for this particular evaluation, we selected communities between 7 and 14 years ago, and were located throughout West Virginia, as you can see here on the map. We did have one in a neighboring state, which was Pennsylvania. Impact data were collected through telephone surveys administered by some of our graduate students here at WVU in the Masters of Public Administration program. And the survey included both open and ended questions. And these questions were designed to assess whether recommendations from the initial impression visit led to changes in the community and economic conditions. And just so you can get a feel, the participants, the survey participants, included folks like city officials, extension service agents, and other community representatives who had taken part in the particular program initially. And we made multiple attempts in contacting these folks by way of phone call, email, and whatnot. And what we found was there was, a time lag between the initial program visits and this evaluation, and that caused a little bit of complication in trying to reach these communities. So you can imagine the turnover rate that occurred with the leadership in the community. So regardless of that, though, we were able to have 18 communities participate. That gave us a completion rate of 56% response rate. So here are some of the questions that you can see on the screen that we used for the survey. Essentially, we looked at whether the program had a beneficial impact on their community. Did they generally, the general condition of their community improve? What were the community improvements? A few more questions here. What were other improvements made, and what were the barriers that prevented a community from implementing the suggestions? And lastly, what were other programs their community participated in? So getting to the results here, the majority of responding communities reported that the First Impressions program led to positive changes in community and economic development. Overall, 89% of the survey respondents reported beneficial impacts, and 67% reported that general conditions of their community had improved as a result of the program. So I think that it's time to take a little poll here, if we could, to change things up here. If you would answer this question, it will be fun to see if you can guess what the most common improvements were. Looking like improved signage. We'll give you a couple more seconds here to take the poll.
Yeah, let me know when you want it broadcast.
Okay. Let's give it a couple more seconds. Okay, Scott, I think we're good. All right.
Okay, they've got it.
All right, so now we see here that your answer was 50% beautification, and we've got 32.35% improved signage. And what you can see here next is the actual data. The most common improvements were signage and community beautification programs. And so 10 communities, that was 56%, indicated adding or improving welcome and directional signage. Several communities indicated improving the visibility of their signage, directing visitors downtown, and actively working with businesses to standardize their downtown signage. Beautification initiatives included things like landscaping programs, increased litter code enforcement, and things like that. 2 communities actually used mural and public art projects in their downtown business district. And we had 1 community that indicated that they were working to pass an abandoned building ordinance. So let's move on to the program barriers. Although communities were overwhelmingly successful in implementing at least some program suggestions that were made based from their recommendations from the First Impressions visit. Barriers to both project initiation and completion were common. So as you can see here, over 89% of communities identified barriers that limited their ability to carry out improvements. And there were 72% reported money and resources, and 28% reported human capital and vision. 11% indicated turnover in government leadership, which probably is no surprise to many of us. Sadly, in 1 community that we had surveyed, everyone that was part of the initial First Impressions program had died off. So that's just the reality of, you know, conducting a long-term study. So now we take a look at the overcoming barriers, and in many communities, these barriers were overcome by engaging in participation, or I'm sorry, partnerships with other state and regional initiatives and development organizations. Beyond the partnerships described that I mentioned previously, 28% of the community represented indicated participating in West Virginia University's community design program, and I can share more information on that program if anybody's interested after the call. And then I would like to spend a little time on the importance of seeking funding. 7 communities reported actively seeking funding and receiving grants. 5 communities received, there's a grant here in West Virginia called the West Virginia Development Office Flex E-Grants, and they provided between $3,000 to $10,000 per community for leadership and community capacity, and that was community capacity building programs. So the ability to secure funding was especially important in this program success, because once we did a further analysis, it revealed a positive correlation between communities receiving that particular grant that I mentioned, the Flexi grant, and those reporting improvements in general condition of their community. So that was a important finding. And then I'll just move on to implications and recommendations. The results from our First Impressions program evaluation revealed positive outcomes. We know that this program works. The majority of the survey respondents indicated that the program led to positive changes in their community and economic development conditions. More importantly, though, impacts extended beyond program recommendations and initiatives. In addition to revealing the success of the program, the evaluation highlighted opportunities for program improvement. The lack of funding, lack of community vision and initiative, and turnover in leadership are challenges, of course, common to the development process. And the First Impressions program may play, we find, a really strong role in better addressing these challenges. So before I turn it over to Myra, I'd like to leave you with this thought. Without a sense of caring, there can be no sense of community, and First Impressions program impacts would not have been positive without caring community leaders. And this picture you see here is of a little store called Burdine's, 5 and Dime store in Nicholas County, West Virginia. And this store was a highlight of the First Impression visitors in this county, mainly because the store cashier was a true champion for this community. And the reason why she was a true champion is because while the visitors were shopping as a secret shopper, she featured their Buy Local campaign. She did a really awesome job with promoting local restaurants and highlighting their local bed and breakfast and inn, so that the visitors, if they might want to stay there, she was really promoting a place to stay. So this particular champion in this community really gave the First Impressions a good look at what the community is about and what a community champion's role could be, and then reporting the findings about that particular individual and the store led to more champions in the community. And as we grow the program, we continue talking about that case study. So I will end here, but I'd like to turn it over to Myra, because she's going to share with us what's happening in Ohio. Myra?
Okay, Kelly, thanks very much, and thanks very much to Andy for presenting that overview, and maybe thanks very much to Andy for developing this program, because we found in Ohio that it's been an excellent tool for our communities to use. It's very flexible, and they've been able to use it in a number of different ways to work on different needs that they have, adapt it to meet their needs, and we found it also to be a whole lot of fun for the participants. So we use our First Impressions to help local leaders and residents become aware of the impression that a visitor walks away from when they first visit our community. And we all know what's special about our own communities. We drive through it every day, and we think we know how it looks to outsiders, but to those business travelers or industrial prospects or potential employers, shoppers, or tourists who are coming into our community, share our feelings and see what we want them to see. So we help communities discover if they're sending the message that they intend to send through the First Impressions program. So First Impressions provides first-time visitor review of the community. The one way we've used this very effectively is to help communities who are involved with downtown planning or community planning to use this with their processes to see, is their plan working? Are they really achieving the goals that they want to achieve? Can they build further on what's working well and also then correct things that they want to improve that might not be sending the best image? So the First impression program in Ohio is basically 3 types. We developed the community program using Andy's model, adapting Andy's model in 2000 as a community assessment approach that was flexible and adaptable enough, as I said before, to use in a number of different situations. We then followed up with a first impressions program for byways and tourism corridors in 2001, and then in 2002 we adapted it to main streets. And Andy mentioned that somebody had asked if he could use it with a church. We actually even took the first impressions design and started using it in our OSU extension offices. So it is extremely flexible. So our experience to date is we've done 29 communities, 6 main streets, and 2 byways. And Andy talked about how you're assessing the physical features of the community as well as the emotional feel of the community, how it looks, smells, what kind of senses you get. So you're looking at both the physical attributes as well as kind of the feeling that that community projects. With the Downtown Main Street program, we've done 6 downtowns. We've adapted it to focus on features that would be important for a successful downtown, such as hours of business, customer service, attractiveness of the downtown, ease of parking and navigation, which gets back to signage, range of businesses, second-story residential, those sorts of issues. With byways and tourism corridors, we're looking at how effectively the community's image of that byway, because usually byways have an image and a name, like the Amish Country Byway in Holmes County. This program looks at how does this image come across to the visitor? Does the visitor even know they're on the byway? Is there appropriate signage, rest opportunities, information, and maybe most importantly, are the businesses along the way aware of and supportive and knowledgeable about the byway? This is a profile for our community program, just giving you an idea of what kinds of communities have participated. It's mostly smaller communities in rural counties. Almost half were county seats. Primary interest was economic development and travel and tourism, and county extension offices were a key player in 2/3 of the projects, managing and facilitating and presenting results to the community. The process we use is similar to the process that Andy developed, but we made a few tweaks. One is that we do piggyback this frequently on top of other community planning efforts and kind of offer it as a benefit of participating in planning. We found that the volunteer team mix is most effective when it's combining both professionals and lay people. And we usually like communities to have more lay people than professionals. And what I mean by that is chamber executives are good. You know, the convention and visitors bureau head is good, but you also need that retired school principal, you know, that teacher in your local schools, those people who are going to take a more practical and maybe less professional view of the community, which in combination works out to be much better. Extension's usually an ex officio team member. What we ask communities to do is to check the community's website before visiting the other community, the volunteer visitors, so that they can get a sense of what that community is trying to say it is. So then when they go there, does that image reinforce their marketing approach? And we have a return trip questionnaire because we've really found that the visitors pick up ideas from the community they visit that they then want to apply in their own community. So we've kind of formalized this a little and have them fill out a return trip questionnaire on their way home so they can discuss what they plan to adopt in their own community within the next 12 months. So next I'd like to look at 3 things that we found in terms of the communities that we did in terms of their readiness. And the first thing is that often communities do not send the message they intend to send. Either some feature or image is not clearly stated or something else distracts from it. what we found is 73% of the communities had tourism as their major economic development strategy, while only 63% of those had a clear idea of the message they wanted to send, and only 11% were successful in sending the intended message. So there was a definite disconnect there between what they were trying to send out and what they were actually sending. Now this is one that did work. This is a small village of Sugar Creek in eastern Ohio, and their intent was to blend Amish and Swiss culture in their food, architecture, businesses.
Myra has cut out for some reason. This might be a good moment to talk about a couple of questions that came in on the chat while Myra's sound comes back here, hopefully. One was on charging for the program. I'm wondering if Andy and Kelly could talk about that. I guess in Wisconsin there is no charge. Is it always the same charge, Kelly, in West Virginia?
Yeah, we actually have a couple of different fees, Scott. One is if the county or the community is considered a distressed community, we will work with our state organization to try to get some funding for them for the particular program, and that particular fee for them is less than our regular community fee. So we may charge between $1,000 and $750, depending on the community status and their need for help.
Scott, there were a couple of other questions. I don't know if everybody's watching the text, but Bill Ryan was just asking if we had any success engaging absentee building or property owners. And one of the stories I'd share is that we had a state senator in one of our communities in Grant County that had business property on Main Street that was a huge eyesore, and nobody in the community was willing to address that problem given his stature. But having a visitation team come in, they were obviously free to point out this eyesore, and the problems with that building front were taken care of in short order when it was in the report and reported within the newspaper and at the downtown retreat. One of the things I'd like to emphasize, I think, as a response to Bill's question, is you can't just do this program and share the report. There's got to be follow-up, and some kind of a formal presentation to the community, I think, is invaluable. And in that community presentation, as Bill's pointing out, making sure that you've got the business owners, whether they're resident property owners or absentee, would probably be critical in addressing those issues. And so that community of Fenimore that's used this program 9 times, there's a community of about 2,400, I think that's the population, and they would do an annual retreat and literally get 100 or more people in a very small community to come to this event and learn what was in the First Impressions program, create action teams to address the issues and opportunities in the report. So it's really about what does the community do with the report. And if you just participate in the exchange and do nothing more than that, your impacts are probably going to be minimal. There was also several questions about photography, and I guess we didn't really talk about that, but photography is a critical component of First Impressions. You are taking pictures as you're doing the visits, and this can be a little tricky. If you're in a really small community, you're going to be fairly obvious if you start taking lots of pictures in a community of 600 or 700 people. And so we often recommend doing the pictures after you're done completing your visit and talking with Main Street business owners, and so that you don't give away that you're part of the First Impressions team. And then I remember a funny incident up in Kaukauna, participating in an exchange shortly after 911 and being followed all around town by the police car because he thought it was odd that I was taking pictures of City Hall, and finally pulled me over to ask what I was doing in the community. And so, it can be tricky, but photography, and especially reporting back to the community, those images can be pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think.
Myra, do we have you back?
We don't have Myra. I think she's lost her connection because she's actually disappeared from the list. But I was going to add in some of my work that I found that it's in community development, it's often difficult to get the youth to talk about their community or open up. But if you give them a pre-assignment, you tell them that in a month you'll be back and you want to see some pictures that they've taken of their community, points of pride and things that they'd like to see addressed. You can't get them to stop talking once you give them that assignment. They come back with those pictures. So it's really a wonderful way to engage the kind of the teen population into a community development program. So think about that as you're moving forward with program design. Laura had a question too. Maybe Andy, you can answer that one or
Oh yeah, okay, so Laura Brown is asking about doing a neighborhood level. I think as we were hearing about the evaluation efforts and the size of the communities, this tends to be used by smaller communities, but Jerry Bratz in Waukesha County is working on a neighborhood version of this, and I see no reasons why that wouldn't work. So in other words, you could actually have multiple neighborhoods within a large urban area conducting an exchange. We have had communities in the 50,000 population range participate in this program, but have added an overnight as a part of that. And that's another interesting component, that you stay at the hotel, but it's a longer commitment. So I think an urban neighborhood exchange would do well, and I need to check back with Jerry and see where he's at. I'm not aware of other states doing it at the neighborhood level, but I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be effective. Scott, I was going to say on the youth component, the coordinator's manual that we have in Wisconsin has some recommendations on who should be on the visitation team, and we strongly recommend that you have a youth representative, and that might require getting permission to have one of the students get a day off from school to participate in the program, but you end up with very different results when you have a youth member participate. And then Steve Kolstad, our community resource development educator in Richland County, did a version with campuses to basically measure how did the community accept the students within the community, and did an exchange between two of our UW campuses.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think that perspective. I think if you can get them to open up, it really can help the adults respond well to some of the recommendations, because a lot of times you hear from the adults is, well, why are all the young people leaving? And then if you have the young people there telling you what some of the issues are, then it can really motivate folks to work on some of the things that are weaknesses in the community. So I'm wondering if Andy or Kelly, you want to maybe briefly cover Myra's, the rest of Myra's slides?
We could do that. I see we've got also one other question from Kim Walker, and our volunteers given travel expenses or spending money for the day, and I suspect this is all over the board from community to community and by state. I can tell you that in Wisconsin, quite often we have a local sponsor, which might be the Chamber of Commerce or the Main Street, that would certainly cover expenses for the day, and in other cases we just have volunteers that are committed and are willing to cover those costs. So still don't have her back, do we? Okay.
And Andy, this is Kelly. I think here in West Virginia, just a little bit of a different spin on the cost for travel. What we typically do is use of course, the fee that the community pays, and then we use those funds to cover the cost for the travel and any expenses they incur. and our visitors are made up of, all different age groups, and as you mentioned, the youth component is very important, and that's something that we will want to continue to work on in terms of identifying that youth to go on the visit. I think that's really important. And then the other thing I wanted to mention here is in terms of the actual program and taking a different approach depending on the size and what the community needs. One of the things that we've been exploring here in West Virginia is working on a tourism first impressions program where we open it up more regionally. And with that particular program, our visitors bureaus have been coming together to fund that effort, and so we conducted a pilot with that to work out the bugs of that particular program and see how that might work for the state. And the funding was, of course, included the overnight stay with the hotel that you had mentioned earlier, and then also any tourism activities that the visitors would go through and do during their visit.
Scott, I'm going to go through these last few slides because the experiences in Ohio are actually really similar to here in Wisconsin. So Myra was going to talk about community readiness, and she was pointing out that 95% of the communities had insufficient and confusing directional information signage, and that gets back to Kelly's evaluation work showing the large number of communities that did something about that. We had a sign maker in Grant County that just loved this program because he worked with most of the communities on integrating their logos and their themes into their signage. And when you think about it, the second point, it was difficult to find key community features and amenities such as schools, parks, and industrial parks that certainly tied into to signage. And the problem is in small communities, most people don't even use their turn signals because their neighbors know which direction they're going to turn. They know where all those features are, and they often aren't thinking about how to make them easily identifiable and easy to find within the community, and that can be addressed through quality signage, and that's often a result of participating in the programs. She noted that 65% of the communities had unattractive signage, often at major entrances. So again, when you're talking about a short visit, and our program actually has the visitation team actually just driving through the community, pulling over and recording their first observations and thoughts, and it's things like the first signage, the first things that you see in the community that might impact your decision to actually make a stop in that community. So that is certainly consistent with some of the things that we see here in Wisconsin. And not only having signage, but having it presented in a way that's not confusing. There's nothing more frustrating than getting lost in a community and not being able to find the location that you're trying to find. Finding number 3 on readiness, local awareness of unique assets and a resident's role as ambassadors often not understood. I completely agree with this, that communities, again, take for granted their biggest assets, and I don't know if Greg Weiss is still online, but I remember one exchange with the city of Baraboo, and one of the key points in that first report was that they had this huge asset in the Baraboo River, but you'd have a hard time finding it, and the community hadn't really maximized the use of that resource with things like river walks, and that's actually been a focus in Baraboo in the last few years, trying to take advantage of that amenity. And I think when communities go on this exchange, they come back to their own communities with a different set of glasses, and they start looking at their community differently than they did before, having played that role. And the other thing that you obviously always experience is the frontline employees that maybe aren't the best ambassadors for the community. And James and I used to almost always do a customer service training for the community following first impressions, and it was geared towards the frontline employees to help them understand the assets in the community, because it's not atypical to visit a restaurant or a hardware store and be told that there's nothing to do in that community. So the program helps the community understand what those assets are. Again, in Ohio, of the 32 community visits, very few visitation teams encountered knowledgeable, friendly, and positive residents. Maybe that screams out for things like customer service training and working with our small business development centers to provide that kind of training. Secondly, actually, I think we've got Myra back on here. At least I'm seeing her pop up.
Yeah, it looks like she's
Myra,
back.
as you're getting, there we go.
We covered a few of your slides during your absence, so you can maybe just pick up on this this bullet point here on the businesses that are considering relocation, I think is what you're talking about there. Well, maybe we don't have her.
Just saw her microphone pop up, and now I don't see it.
Well, she's on. I see her, but apparently she doesn't have sound.
Myra, I'm back on. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. We had to shut down and start all over again.
Okay, that's
Myra,
great.
we're on bullet 2 of this slide, so you can go ahead.
Oh, is this where we ended?
No, I actually covered a couple of your points, so you could go ahead and pick it up here.
Okay. Yeah, we found that when we visited communities that very few of them were ready, and that the teams encountered, very few teams encountered knowledgeable, friendly, and positive residents, which was definitely did not leave a positive impression in the visitors' minds. I went on one trip and I was told that you know, there really wasn't anything to do in that community and that I needed to go 20 miles down the road to another community where a lot of stuff was going on. So that impression, oftentimes our communities do not realize what that person on the street or that frontline person is saying about their community, what kind of impression it leaves. And businesses often visit unannounced, as we know, and that definitely is not the kind of impression you want to leave with those visitors. The final slide I have is one that actually did work, where the community did take their role as ambassadors seriously, and you can see that the visitors found that not only shop owners were eager to offer suggestion, but also just folks on the street. We encourage them to stop and talk to people, and you know, to try and interact with as many people as they can, eat lunch, talk to the waitresses, you know, just generally get around and see what people's impression of their own community is. This is one that did work because they did find knowledgeable and informed individuals who knew what was going on with their community and actually, more importantly, knew the kind of image that they were trying to project. So hopefully I didn't lose too much here. And thanks, Andy, for filling in. I'm not sure what happened.
No problem.
Yeah, thanks.
You know, I was thinking
Thanks to all of you. It's great to hear from 3 different states about a similar program, but implemented in different ways. I want to go back to that question while people are filling out the evaluation here. Barb Fraser asked about, you know, what about the ones that don't work? And I think that got touched upon in some of what Myra and Kelly shared, but you know, kind of dive down a little bit deeper into that. What happens when it doesn't work? What tends to be the common story when it doesn't work?
Well, it's okay with the silence here, and one of the things I can tell you, and I think it's pretty interesting and pretty telling, is that I can only think of one experience where the community got basically a bad report. I mean, I don't know what this team thought. I think they thought they were supposed to be movie critics and were overly critical of the community, and the solution was to do another exchange. But of all the exchanges that I've done, I can only think of one that probably had some inappropriate recommendations or wasn't very helpful for the community. I think certainly resources is always a question. You know, we already knew what the problems were. You reinforce that, but we still don't have the money to solve the problem. But I think one of the things that First Impressions can do is help prioritize, so that there is always an overwhelming number of things that need to be done in a community, and this might be one of the tools to be used to help prioritize where they spend their limited resources. So I would say that it often comes back to resources if they're unable to implement any change. But I'd be curious to hear what Myra and Kelly have to say.
Yeah, Andy, in Ohio, one thing we did do with the report was we'd provide not only the overall themes of what we heard the visitation teams say, kind of pull those out and help the community focus on those, but we also provided a list of resources that they may want to take advantage of. For instance, there was someone at Ohio State University who was knowledgeable about community signage, so we sent them in that direction. So we tried to encourage them to take next steps, realizing that there are limited resources, but at least doing what we could to identify people and programs that they might be able to seek for assistance.
I would agree with that completely. I think that when we've struggled here in West Virginia, it has been when the follow-up hasn't been as strong as it should be. So, you know, at the very least, I like what you're saying in giving them those tools and those resources and checking in with the community. Again, I think that's when we have seen that, you know, some of the communities haven't done so well as when we did not do that. Also, I would say that, you know, with West Virginia charging a small fee for this particular program, we need to pick our funding sources wisely and allow those funding sources to be, you know, selected based on a true, genuine concern for the community. We had one incident where we did, you know, work with a particular bank in that community, in that we felt that this bank was going to do the right thing and really, you know, work together with the community leaders to make the recommendations, you know, evolve and make some changes based on the recommendations. And what we found was that funder, the bank, kept the results to themselves and used the program just for their benefit. So we learned from that mistake for certain.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think another point sort of related to that is I've always found that programs are stronger, you know, if you're charging the community a fee, they tend to be a bit stronger, a little more sustainable if the more than one entity in the community helps cover that fee. It's sort of another version of the skin in the game that you talked about, that you know, if a group of individuals or businesses or other entities have all contributed to that $700 or whatever it is, there's just more general buy-in to it, and you know, as a service provider, you have a little more confidence that yes, there is a group of people there that will try to implement this, because they kind of keep each other honest once they've all contributed. And
yeah, we had missed a question from Donna O'Grady, and the question was, do these volunteers visit as a team or individually? And what I wanted to say is that, you know, I think it's important to actually do this as a team, because I've seen a lot of power in the conversations that take place in the car, going to the community and then coming back. But I'd also say we have had some communities that have had multiple teams because they just couldn't coordinate schedule do the trip. But I think that there is some great value in having the team go up together, and then when they get to the community, they split up into teams of one or two. So that group conversation in the car, I think, can be pretty important.
Yeah, we do that.
it seems that folks have been... Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say we encourage them also to go as a team and to ride in the same car, and like you said, Andy, split up in during, you know, their visit. But then, I don't know whether you heard me earlier, but we do a return trip questionnaire where they try to capture the things they're going to use in their own communities from what they've seen in the community they visited. So
Mhm.
they're able to do that then when they're all sitting in the car on the way home.
Great. Well, I think we've come to the end of our hour here. There's it's great questions, and I think a lot of folks on the line seem to have gotten some good information that they're going to follow up on in their programming and their other activities. So I want to thank all of you for your contributions today, and we can turn off the recording.